shoplifting without being challenged, of phones being snatched off the street, of bicycles being stolen with impunity in broad daylight. Those are the things, as well as the more serious crime that the police are wrestling with, that I think that people are worried about, and worried about whether or not they will get a response from the police to deal with those things that really concern them.
Let's speak with Andy Trotter. Andy's a former Chief Constable of the British Transport Police. Andy's also a former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Andy, thanks very much for joining us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What's your assessment of how the police and the emergency services responded, and of course the staff on the train responded to last night's attack?
Well, after such an awful, horrific event, and one can only think of the terror of those poor passengers on that train with these two offenders, I think the response by the Network Rail, by the driver, by the emergency services was exemplary. It worked very well. They've done a lot of training, a lot of exercises, and that certainly paid off on the night. And British Transport Police have a very close relationship with Network Rail, obviously, every day of the week. And they know how the system works. They know how they can bring a train into a safe station. And Cambridgeshire Police's response was first class in arresting those offenders safely.
And how do you, when you're sort of, in charge of the British Transport Police, how do you sort of prepare for some kind of attack like this? Do you do exercises? Do you do drills? How do you prepare?
There are lots of exercises. You go right back to 7/7 and before. There will be exercises all the time looking at counter-terrorism, looking at train crashes, a whole range of different issues. And BTP will exercise with other forces across England, Wales and Scotland. They'll exercise with the security services as well. And they'll carry out all sorts of different drills just to make sure that they can respond. And when there are events, when there are incidents like the dreadful attacks on the Manchester Arena, there'll be debriefs from there. There's a report, of course, into that, so what happened there. And all of the lessons learned from that are then built into future exercises and practice.
And look, it's interesting that the police have kind of changed their policy on incidents like this. They now do give out more information about the suspects or the people they've arrested, particularly with regards to their ethnicity. Do you think this is the right thing for the police to be doing?
I think it's a really interesting question. We had the awful riots after Southport, and one of the accusations was that the people didn't know enough about the suspects, and hence they rioted. And this feeling that things are being kept back and in secret from the public. So I think being open, giving enough information that the police can give, and given that there is a due process here, making sure that we don't prejudice any future trial. So I think in this case, everyone seems to have learned something from what happened at Southport and those incidents afterwards. And this is the current practice. I think there'll be a degree of reflection on it to see, is this the right thing to do? And to make sure that we are giving out appropriate amounts of information for people who are under arrest at the moment but haven't yet been charged. But it's an interesting development, I think.
It is, and particularly with the sort of, the advent of social media now, when there's so much sort of speculation, there can be so much more misinformation. As you say, the police authorities are sort of trapped between that balance of, as you say, that there's due process to be followed in terms of the individuals, but there's often a sort of baying mob on social media now ready to speculate. It's quite, that tightrope's quite difficult, isn't it?
It is difficult, and you contrast it in events that happen in the United States, for example, when the police give out huge amounts of information from the beginning, including great chunks of the prosecution case, which isn't the way we deal with things here. We are concerned about contempt of court, and we are concerned, perhaps not so much in this case, but there are many cases when people who are arrested who are subsequently not charged, who may not have committed an offence. I think one's got to be a little cautious about how much information we get out. Not to be secretive, that's not what I'm saying at all, but making sure that we pay due respect to the whole of the process and to all individuals involved, and the fact that there'll be ongoing investigation and maybe raids on property to be carried out. And this demand for instant information, which I understand, but that's not the number one priority. Equally, we don't want people going there and rioting under any circumstance, but you don't necessarily have to feed everyone every bit of information that comes out at the time. So I think let's reflect upon this, and no doubt the police will, and so will the Crown Prosecution Service, to make sure we've got this aspect of it right.
And look, Andy, there's going to be a lot of fear about, I know these incidents don't happen very often, but it's understandable that people will be worried about safety on trains and generally, how to make the transport network safer for people. And there's lots of people have been messaging in, you don't think about how confined that space is on a train until you hear about an absolutely horrible, frightening story like this. What do you think this means in terms of having more of a police presence on trains and on transportation? But also, what do you think it means in terms of actually having staff on trains as well, actual sort of, human beings on trains as train staff as well?
Well, while events such as this are thankfully rare, I do think people up and down the country today are talking about how they feel on trains. If there's any sort of disorder or crime or they're under threat, they can't get off, they're stuck in there. And I think that's what this conversation is moving on to at the moment, which is not directly related to this, but has provoked, I think, a real discussion about safety and security. We know that all police forces are under huge pressure. Many of them are facing cuts. There'll be fewer police officers.
Yeah.
We know that the security companies and the directly employed employees of the rail companies are not as numerous as they were. So what we're seeing is fewer people out there at a time, I think, when most of us would like to see more. So I do hope that from good thing that might come out of this dreadful event is that there is a discussion about what we want as passengers, what we want as members of the public, what the rail staff want as well. Is more than, shaving costs off all the time. And it's a good reminder to the people who pay for the services, be those private sector rail companies and us as passengers as well, of course, or taxpayers, that there is a price to pay for security. And I think we need to have a really good look at this, because a lot of people don't feel safe. They are worried about it. They're worried about themselves, worried about their loved ones. And I think we need to have a really good look at security across the transport system.
I think that's absolutely right, Andy. I think there's a lot of women or if you're a woman travelling late at night on the train, I've had some quite bad encounters, and it's been so good to have an actual kind of, couple of guards on the train to come and sort issues out. I know Tanny Gray-Thompson, who's a great campaigner for disabled people, has sort of said having actual people to help you get on and off the train is really important. And I hope there is a conversation about that now. I think that's a really, really important point. And also just antisocial behaviour and all of that kind of thing as well, which can be quite upsetting for people if you're kind of in an enclosed space on the train for you or your kids or whoever. And Andy, I just want to finally ask you just to pick up on what Kemi Badenoch was kind of alluding to at the end. And we've seen a bit of this from some politicians and opinion formers on social media, and some of our listeners have been messaging in saying that they do feel that this country has become more unsafe. I know this is a sort of one-off incident, and of course everyone is in a kind of heightened state of anxiety now, but a lot of my listeners are messaging in going, they do feel more kind of nervous about things, going out and about. What do you think as a sort of police and crime professional?
And also as a member of the public and as a father and grandfather.
And a human being, yeah.
Yeah, I share those concerns. And one can look at the crime stats, which will tell you one story, but I do think it's not so much about the crime statistics, but it is about how we feel.
Yeah.
And I think it's about that disorder. So, it is right down to the people jumping over barriers at railway stations.
Yeah.
Brazenly walking out of shops, and shoplifting without being challenged, of phones being snatched off the street, of bicycles being stolen with impunity in broad daylight. Those are the things, as well as the more serious crime that the police are wrestling with, that I think that people are worried about whether or not they will get a response from the police to deal with those things that really concern them. Most crimes are solved by members of the public. It's the information the public give that solves crime. And we want to be really sure the public have confidence. The police will have confidence that the public will come forward and deal with, and the police will deal with that information properly and swiftly and efficiently. It's not a criticism of the police. They're under enormous pressure. They've never really recovered from those dreadful cuts of 2010. Yeah. And those cuts are continuing. Whatever the overall amount of money is they're getting, and I know there's no bottomless pit for public funds, I totally get that. But the pressures that they're under are enormous, and the police stations are closing all the time. And this is not what I think the public want.
Yeah,
visible police who react.
I totally agree, Andy. I mean, also, a lot of people, as you say, the overall crime stats tell one story about how people feel and what they're seeing in their own communities. And I think what's often described as low-level crime shouldn't be described as low-level crime, because that kind of crime, as you say, that shoplifting, jumping the barriers, all of that stuff. I mean, I do believe in the broken windows theory, where those small things can lead to a sense that you can just get away with anything, and they can lead to the bigger things. And we do need more police to take things seriously. Do you hope this government will do more to bolster policing?
I hope they will. They're under enormous pressure. We've got the budget coming up. Everyone wants more money. I totally get that. But there's something absolutely fundamental about public safety. And I think we trade a lot to get that right, to have a really good police service, really good private security and public security in public spaces, on the railway trains, on the underground, on the buses. I think that would make our lives a lot better. And I think overall be very good for trade, very good for the public, very good for the country at large, and good for our peace of mind as we worry about our loved ones going about in public, on the trains, etc. So I certainly hope they do get into and address this. We'll see.
Well, look, really good to speak with you, Andy. Thanks very much for your time. That's Andy Trotter, former Chief Constable of the British Transport Police and also former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Really interesting what he said at the end there, saying that he, is somebody who's very much steeped in the police and the British Transport Police, and, now a citizen. He does think that things are getting worse.